The Vice President is meeting the Ghana National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and he says, look, there are so many problems with our tax system, and he wants to make it right. He wants to start on a clean slate from 2025, if given the chance to be President of the Republic. And so there'll be tax amnesty. He also says our tax system is complex, and he intends to change that. We've been joined this morning by former Finance Minister Seth Terkper. He knows a lot when it comes to taxation. Seth Terkper, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning to you, and thanks for the compliment.
Great.
I learned from others, so yeah.
Good. Now, before we take your views on what the Vice President is saying, just let's listen to what the Vice President said.
The targets that they are set, these hardworking officers, sometimes are very unrealistic. And that leads to harassment of business, because you have to get something out of them. And this is why you say prepay when you haven't earned 1 cent, 1 cedi, and you have to prepay. We are going to introduce a very simple and business-friendly tax system as we have in Estonia. Simple flat tax. Anybody can calculate their tax liability just on the back of an envelope. You don't need any a tax accountant really to tell you. So we have had a situation where there's so much dispute between GRA and businesses over what is owed. I am aware of a company that is being charged, something like 50 million Ghana cedis, and they say they are not even worth up to 5 million, right? There's so much going because of the harassment and the need to make money. So we are going to start with a clean slate in 2025. And that is why in 2025, we are going to grant a tax amnesty to all businesses and individuals and start afresh. All businesses and individuals will have a tax amnesty, and we will start afresh.
So you heard from the Vice President, Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia. Honorable Seth Terkper, you've heard from him. He's talked about the complex system we have here. And he intends to change it. He intends to have a flat tax rate that everybody can calculate. In fact, on the back of a paper, you just calculate, as is done in Estonia, he mentions. But also to start on a clean slate tax amnesty. What's your take on that? Good, isn't it?
Thank you very much. Yeah, it looks attractive but unrealistic. And a big question is, which tax are we talking about? VAT is a flat rate tax. It was at 15%, increased to 17.5%, but that was the only rate. It is the current administration that introduced the VAT flat rate scheme, which made it complex in the first place. It was this same administration that removed Get Fund and NHIL from the VAT base and made them levies. They call them straight levies. That added a complexity because businesses now have to file separately for VAT and file separately for straight levy, the two straight levies, and then they were denied input tax credit, or refund, which was a characteristic of the VAT. And everybody added it to cost, right? After that, they started adding other levies. Currently they have about 15 levies. So when you talk about the complexity of the tax administration, when we take VAT, which globally is a single rate, flat rate, it is this administration that has made it complex. Now, secondly, taxation has an objective. All our tax instruments are good. So take excise. Are you going to make excise flat rate? Because excise is punitive. So are you saying that if I have my small car and I go and buy petrol and it is a 4-cylinder or whatever 2-cylinder, I should pay the same as a person with V8, V6, and the rest who are the guzzlers and who pollute the environment more. Is that what you are saying? Because excise is designed to be punitive, and that's why it's on alcohol, petroleum, and tobacco, which are meant to be injurious and harmful products, right? So again, what are you going to make flat about it? A single rate? Then he's likely talking about the income tax.
Yes.
And the income tax has an equity principle. The more you earn, the more you pay. So if I pay 1,000 cedis at 10%, I pay 100 at 10% on my 1,000, which I earn, right?
Mm-hmm.
And somebody pays 1,000 on his 10,000. The person who is paying 1,000 on his 10,000, trust me, has a lesser tax impact or burden than the person who is earning 1,000. Which is why when you are earning a certain level of income close to minimum wage, you don't even pay taxes at all. And then the rate is graduated so that if you earn slightly above the zero, which is the exemption, you pay 5%. If you earn a bit higher, you pay 10%. A bit higher, you pay 15%. Again, the complexity. The top marginal rate was being brought down to 25%. It is this same administration that increased it to 30% and to 35%. The economic management team of the same administration. So who made the tax system complex? Right? So it may sound attractive, but the flat rate would undermine what we call the equity or fairness of the tax, a very important principle that says that the more you earn, the more you must pay towards the development of the country.
So I mean,
this is accepted.
Mr.
And
Terkper,
that is why, that is why you have only a few countries, and Estonia is always cited. That's why many countries don't implement the flat rate, because it is regressive. And I'm surprised that the Vice President is saying this, because they oppose the VAT on grounds of being regressive, even though it has a flat rate, and made it even more complex and more regressive. Now you want to add income tax and make that also regressive. So I don't think it's implementable. It's one of the things that, again, we are back to the era where things are set. They look attractive and simple, but trust me, it will be very difficult to implement. And even if we did, it will be we'll be implementing a very, very unfair tax system.
Now, he's speaking to businesses. No, hold on a minute. He's speaking to businesses, and so he's also making reference to their corporate income taxes, for instance. He makes a point that they have to pay taxes quarterly, sometimes even without making much. And so he believes some of these things should change. Is he wrong?
Again, the Vice President is getting it wrong. When Professor Mills became Commissioner of Income Tax, he made a very significant change because he was a tax expert. The quarterly payments he's talking about used to be paid in advance at the beginning of the month, because he's saying that to make it easy for you to pay your tax, and also not to take everything to the end of the year, you pay quarterly. But it was being paid in advance. It was changed to quarterly in arrears, which is you pay at the end of the month, the same way you do with VAT, which you pay even at the end of the following month. So it is presumed that the quarterly amount you are paying, you have already earned the income, and therefore pay a portion of the tax instead of carrying to the end of the year. So unless the current administration has changed the system, then what he's saying, I think somebody needs to get into understand, the technical people, that we now pay the quarterly advance since Professor Mills' time as commissioner, as a payment of tax in arrears, not in advance as it used to be.
How about the tax amnesty?
Go to Act 955, 2017. This administration implemented an amnesty law. They have still not accounted to the nation as to how effective the tax amnesty was. It was implemented in 2019. I'm giving you the title. Ghana Tax Amnesty, Act 2017, Act 955, I believe. The reason many countries don't, there are about 3 reasons why many countries don't grant amnesty unless under very special circumstances. It means that you are forgiving the tax for the non-compliance, the person who did not comply. And those who complied are paid faithfully. What is the reward for them? They have been progressive in making a payment. The second point, therefore, is that it is realized that the more frequent you do amnesty, 2017 you did an amnesty, you want to do another amnesty, people will get to know that non-compliance pays. The second reason. And therefore, since non-compliance pays, they would rather wait until the next amnesty. And the country that used to grant many amnesties and have started is India. You can Google and check. Again, this is why amnesty is not, when something is not done globally, like the flat tax amnesty, you must ask yourself why. This is the other reason, that you enter non-compliance. And the third reason is that the tax system is based on what's called voluntary compliance or self-assessment. So it is the taxpayer who has to sit back and say, this is the amount of VAT sales that I made, I must pay the tax. This is the amount of income that I earn, either personal income or corporate income tax. And by the way, the corporate income tax is flat. And it came down to 25%. In the current administration, that increased it, to 35%. So what we are talking about in terms of flat tax is just personal income tax. But back to amnesty, we are saying that, therefore, you have infringed the law. And it's when you infringe the law that the enforcement comes in to make you comply. So the more we are beginning to, get into that trap of granting amnesty, by the time you get a third one, taxpayers will know. And then they will get used to it. And they will put pressure on every government to grant an amnesty. That is the only issue with amnesty. And that's why many countries don't apply it. It's okay if you apply it once in a long while. But for you to apply it within a decade twice, when you have not even accounted for the success. Let's first tell Ghanaians what was the success rate in 2017. And then we can know whether it was effective or not. And if it was effective, then why do grant another, amnesty? It is the fact that it wasn't effective, and it's because, you have made the tax regime so complex that there's massive evasion and avoidance of the tax.
Yes, but Honorable Terkper, when you talk about the fact that this could encourage, people non-compliant, some also argue that there are persons who know today that if they were to go if they were to get into the tax system, they may have to pay so much. So these persons are unwilling to get in. But once there's an amnesty, they may be willing to get in. And once they get in, subsequently, they get to pay. So there's also some positive aspect to it, isn't it?
I would rather advise taxpayers that rather than wait for the amnesty, they should go to the Commissioner General or their tax office and make an arrangement. It's allowed to make an arrangement to clear your tax arrears. Because you may be waiting for an amnesty, which because of public sentiment may not happen. So the tax law allows it for you to go to the tax office and say, I've been delinquent, I now want to be straight, and therefore can you allow me to spread my tax, which I owe over a period of time. And then you would even get more education, because sometimes you pay a flat rate like the quarterly estimates that we were talking about, but you may not have any income, so they can educate you. In Ghana, a lot of people talk about tax incentives and the rest, which are already in the tax law. For example, if you have a container, right, and you bought a container for 20,000, 30,000 Ghana cedis, you can depreciate that container if you file your return. There's nothing that says that you must be in a shop, before you can claim the depreciation. Secondly, if you are using your house and you have 1 meter and you have a shop, right, and the meter is, you can approach, a tax expert, and I don't mean an expensive one. There are many of them who can advise you, and you can charge a proportion of the electricity which you use to do the business against your income, and you pay less tax.
Yes.
If you are making losses, it is not only, in fact, again, under Professor Mills, what used to be special incentives for only foreigners who go to DIPC at the time was put in the law to make it applicable. So if you start a small business and you are making losses, because you have to grow before you can, if you make a loss and you file your return, you can be allowed to recover, not to pay, what we call the tax holiday. That it doesn't apply to only, So I think we should be promoting tax education and tax, and that is why the Income Tax Act was revised. And that is why, at a point in time, if you remember, the tax offices were split into large, medium, and small, so that, the small offices can pay attention to the small businesses who do not even pay VAT because of the VAT threshold.
Okay.
So our tax regime is structured. Let us stop the distortion. Let us find a way of phasing out the 15 or so, levies. The levies, many of the taxes we are calling levies today, I can assure you, under the old Act 500 and Act 501, they were called service taxes. And they were all placed under the VAT when the VAT was introduced. So what we are doing is that we are reintroducing those taxes, incidentally, by a tradition that opposed the VAT on account of his being a nuisance tax.
Yeah, but
and you are introducing more taxes, which is even making more.
Mr. Terkper, you'd also agree that today we're just going back to the same people and taxing them more. During your tenure, you had always indicated, for instance, that something we have been talking about, the need to expand the tax net consistently. And so the very few people who pay are the ones that are consistently paying. The Vice President makes reference to that and says these people are being burdened. And so we are setting unrealistic targets for the GRA because we've not been able to deal with the system, the structure itself. And so we should be focusing on expanding the network, the net, so that people get to pay taxes. That's something you would agree, wouldn't you?
I would agree, but I have a question.
Go
Today,
ahead.
if you import, everybody knows about ICOMS. Everybody goes online. We call it automation. Today we call it digitalization. And you know exactly, you declare the goods you are bringing in, you pay your taxes online, and then you are ready when the ship comes, because you can do pre-shipment, then you claim. Question: who stopped the automation of the domestic tax system? Who stopped the digitalization of the domestic tax system, which we now call ITAX, and it's now a condition, the ITAX is now a condition in the IMF program. It's the current administration that stopped it. So you see, let me tell you how you can expand the tax base. It's not about putting an army of GRA officials to walk the streets. When all 70% or more of the VAT that is claimed as refund or credit is paid at the port. And one example of expanding the tax base is that the taxpayer has a taxpayer identification number. Now we call it national identification number, with the VIP is championing, right?
Yes.
So your tax identification number for import is the same as your VAT identification number for domestic. So if you are defrauding and you are inflating your VAT refund, your VAT credit, and the rest, the information is sitting in ICOMS to strengthen, the tax base and to apply the appropriate tax. That's the only way in which you also you bring more people who are paying customs duty, for example, and are not paying taxes. The same national identification number, when even domestic, when you supply goods on your VAT return, it is there. So, and your VAT sales or output VAT is the same as your sales for calculating income tax. So let us proceed with automation. Today we are giving excuses after nearly 2 years of the tender. We cannot award the contract, and we are asking for a deferment under the IMF program. So there are many things we can do, right? And by the way, you can look at the burden of the tax in more than one way. Ghana's tax to GDP ratio is around 12-13%. The highest rate we achieved. We are told this year, we are waiting for the final numbers, but this year it will be exceeded. But the highest rate we achieved was 2015. Even before we had 3 oil fields. 2015, even before we had 3 oil fields. Right? How come we are not able to, to expand the tax base? So that there are many ways you can expand the tax base. And there are many mechanisms you can set up, for information gathering. This is digitalization. And this is what, we started under Professor Mills, and it continued under, in fact, some of them started even under Rawlings and under His Kufuor. But the second phase, the creation of GRA, is part of the reform. The measure of IRS and VAT was supposed to actually identify those who were getting income tax while paying VAT and vice versa. That's the reason for the measure. Because it's the same invoice. Why have we stopped the training? Why have we stopped the reorganization of the offices? Because, somebody is trained in only income tax, another person is trained in VAT. Why for 7 years have we stopped? Where is this epiphany coming from? Where is this epiphany coming from? To use a religious term. All of a sudden we become, I'm saying the administration stopped many of these reforms. Just like the gift reform, which is also on the expenditure side. Even gift can provide information for tax administration if you interface it with the ITAX, that's the domestic tax. Because contractors, suppliers, and others have to show their PIN or their national identification in the system. And all of a sudden, their tax offices have access to those things automatically through automation. And then you are sitting there and they send you a return. Right?
Okay.
So the old notion of expanding the tax base by walking the streets and whatever no longer applies. It is digitalization. And we used to call it automation. Right? So that is what is outstanding, and that is what's in the IMF program. We don't need the IMF to come and tell us this. Ghana has a very long experience. In any event, the same IMF and World Bank were giving us technical assistance for setting up all these issues. So who stopped this? Who stopped the march for the phase 2? The revision of all the laws. If we want a simple system for small businesses, there was a flat rate which we introduced after the VAT, and when the Income Tax Act was being promulgated, that made it possible for you to pay only one tax as a small business, and it will meet your income tax presumptive scheme and your VAT obligation at the same time. And that was a compromise, that was made, because there were people who believe in the VAT flat rate scheme. So we said, let the small business pay at least one GRA. So let them pay one rate, which will represent both their income tax and their VAT. That's another simplification. That's another way of making it easy for the small business to apply. Who stopped it? It was reintroduced in the current budget. Right? Why are we not continuing with that to help the small businesses?
Okay. Honorable Terkper, thank you very, very much for joining us. We're very grateful that you made time to join us this morning. Seth Terkper is a former Minister of Finance, and like I indicated, has a lot of expertise in taxation.